ActionSA has announced that it has left the multi-party charter, saying certain parties have betrayed South Africans. The party says that members of the charter discussing possible coalitions with the African National Congress is a clear violation of the pact. It adds that it had completely ruled out a working relationship with the governing party.
All right, let's stay with this particular story now and speak to ActionSA's National Chairperson, Michael Beaumont, who joins us live now. Michael, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Before we even get into your statement and the press briefing earlier on, there is, of course, some of the conversations that continue around the coalitions and around, some of the possible arrangements that we could see at a national level. And speaking to COSATU this afternoon, they described the multi-party charter as a group of yourselves who are trying to cement a right-wing position. How do you respond?
Well, I certainly think that that kind of criticism is to be expected from COSATU. But then rather than imagining that somehow my role is now to defend the multi-party charter, which of course we have announced our departure from today, let me rather just say that ActionSA is delighted that going forward we will now be able to stand on our own 2 feet. We will be our own political party, unencumbered and untethered to organizations that have the kind of baggage to which I think COSATU is referring, and perhaps rightly so. And ActionSA can go out there and be the political party that South Africa needed to be without that kind of baggage around our neck. Certainly, we imagine that this is going to be a great leap forward in ActionSA's quest ahead of the local government elections next year.
There is a view by some who say that the result that we saw is the will of the people. And, speaking to the South African Council of Churches, for example, they say that, political parties are now being mandated to work together. So don't you think then that you may be shooting yourselves on the foot if indeed this view is correct?
Well, I think there's many ways that political parties are expected to work together, and reading this election result to say that everyone should go into government and no one should be in opposition would be a very short and shallow way of assessing this election result. What we are looking at right now is a situation that we think is very dangerous for our country, where you have an ANC whose track record in corruption and malfeasance is so unquestionable. After 30 years in government, it's almost entirely expected of the ANC to continue along that vein. And now you have the official opposition giving the government the votes it needs to continue governing, and in return proposing positions that they would receive for that support. The question starts to emerge, who is going to be the watchdog when the watchdogs have gone into bed with the government? And we are suggesting that parties led by ActionSA and around ActionSA should join in that ecosystem to become an effective opposition. Because if we are going to have unchecked ANC government and an opposition that is conflicted from doing its job, we're going to see an acceleration of the corruption that we have had in our country. We need a strong opposition in South Africa, and ActionSA is willing to step up to be the unofficial opposition.
Do you feel betrayed by the Democratic Alliance?
No, not at all. We are very clear to say that the multi-party charter was a commitment between political parties and the South African people. We think the South African people have been betrayed by the Democratic Alliance, but the great thing about no longer being in the multi-party charter is we do not have to find ourselves explaining for them. What we will say is that ActionSA made a commitment when we signed the multi-party charter. We have committed publicly over the last few years, including in our election campaign, that no vote for ActionSA would ever go to keeping the ANC in power. We are happy that we have lived up to that commitment, and we think it'll be a commitment that South African people will come to appreciate in the full value of time.
So if then, ActionSA is describing what the Democratic Alliance is doing as how you've just described it, is it wise then to still be in a coalition government with them in the city of Tshwane?
Again, I repeat, we are in coalition governments or in arrangements on behalf of the people. We serve the people in these commitments. We do not sit in the city of Tshwane to serve the Democratic Alliance. We sit there to serve the residents of Tshwane. And perhaps the best answer we can give to your question is this. ActionSA right now, because of the advent of an ActionSA deputy mayor, has been able to achieve unprecedented levels of funding for the Rooiwal wastewater treatment plant that will see clean water going to this community for the first time in nearly 20 years on the 1st of September. Those kind of things matter. We will continue doing them. But what we have said to our partners is that if you would like to govern with the ANC here in the city of Tshwane, please let us know and we will step back for you to do that, because our commitment to being the alternative doesn't allow us to govern with the ANC.
They could argue the same and say that they are working for the residents because they do believe that, the voters not giving any party an outright majority means that they want the parties to work together. So they could argue that their decision is for South Africans. How would you respond?
They could argue a great deal, many things, and the great thing is that I'm not the spokesperson for the Democratic Alliance, so I don't have to argue with them. But if you were to put me on the spot, what I would simply say is that an agreement was signed in August and presented to the South African people, saying that these parties would not entertain a working relationship with the ANC. You yourself would have seen these same parties ducking and diving and evading the questions from the media, who have continuously asked them what they will do in the event of the very scenario we have here. And votes were won on the basis of an alternative to the ANC that are now going to be used to keep the ANC in power. We see that as a contradiction, but that's all right. That is between them and the voters. We will focus on ActionSA. We will focus on being the best ActionSA that we can be.
Briefly then, you're not going to Parliament with the leader as well?
That is correct. President Mashaba and I have stepped back from that responsibility with the full knowledge that we have an excellent team of people who will be able to feel like 60 members of Parliament and not just 6, which we think is going to be vital in a space where we need to be the unofficial opposition. And certainly we see that the next conflict lines of our country are a 2026 local government election where we need to work around the clock in 9 provinces to present the ActionSA alternative, recognizing that South Africans suffer probably most from a crisis of local government, and this is the next fault line around which we need to position ActionSA very quickly.
All right, Michael, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That's ActionSA National Chairperson Michael Beaumont.